darkness, silence, and the faint echo of bells. That is where this story begins, inside the walls of a convent that once stood proudly on the hills of the eastern Mediterranean. They were women of faith, women who had given their lives to prayer, to silence, to the light of God, and yet history forgot their cries. When the Ottomans came, the sound of the bells was drowned by the marching of boots, the metallic rhythm of conquest, and the low murmur of fear spreading through the monastery corridors. Empires rise in glory, but they often feed on sanctity, and within those stone walls, faith was no shield against power. It was the 15th century, and the world was being remade. Churches turned into mosques, saints replaced by sultans, and the voices of the devout fading into whispers. The nuns of St. Catherine had never seen soldiers before, only pilgrims and wind, but that day iron entered their sanctuary. They stood still, clutching wooden crosses, watching strangers defile the marble floors, once kissed by their knees. The Ottomans called it victory, yet for the sisters it was desecration, a sacred world broken open by hands that sought domination, not devotion. The empire demanded submission, and for women who had given their lives to Christ, surrender meant something deeper than defeat. It meant the slow death of their spirit. They prayed in Latin, their trembling voices echoing against the stone, the final hymn of a world about to vanish. When the soldiers stormed the chapel, even the candles seemed to shudder, their light bending in fear of the steel that gleamed beneath the archways. Icons were torn from walls, golden frames shattered, relics scattered across the floor like bones of forgotten saints. The eldest of them, Sister Helena, stepped forward, her face pale but unyielding, whispering words of peace to men who did not listen. She spoke not to save herself, but to save the sanctity of the house of God, her hands raised not in surrender, but in protection. The commander ordered her to kneel, but she stood still, eyes fixed on the crucifix behind him, as if waiting for heaven to intervene. When he struck her, the others cried out, their voices rising in anguish, a choir of grief echoing through the broken windows. And in that moment, something within them died, not faith, but the belief that holiness could protect them from cruelty. Outside, the banners of the empire waved above the hill, red and gold against the burning sky, while the sound of the bells was replaced by the call of the muezzin from below. For the first time in centuries, the convent of St. Catherine fell silent, and the silence was deafening. Days passed, and the conquerors turned the monastery into quarters for soldiers, its gardens trampled, its fountains drained. The sisters were ordered to cook, to clean, to serve, as if the sanctity of their vows meant nothing in the eyes of empire. They moved like ghosts through the corridors, their white habits stained with dust, their prayers muttered in whispers beneath the noise of laughter and boots. One by one they were questioned, their relics confiscated, their manuscripts inspected for hidden wealth. The Ottomans claimed to be merciful, yet their mercy was wrapped in humiliation, a slow erosion of spirit. At night the nuns huddled together in the chapel ruins, lighting candles from melted wax scraps, singing psalms too softly to be heard. Sister Helena wrote in secret, her trembling hands recording what the others could not speak, her ink mixed with tears and soot. She wrote of how the soldiers mocked their silence, how they forced them to bow before the banner of the Sultan, how one by one faith was tested by hunger and fear. And yet, she wrote, none of them renounced Christ, though the price of faith had become unbearable. One morning they awoke to find the chapel sealed, the crucifix removed, the altar stripped of its marble. In its place stood the symbol of the crescent, carved into the stone where once prayers had risen to the heavens. Helena did not cry, she simply knelt, pressing her forehead to the ground where the altar had been, whispering a vow that would echo through centuries. If our faith must live in darkness, she said, then let it burn brighter in secret. That night they hid what remained of their icons, wrapping them in linen, burying them beneath the floorboards of their quarters. They tore pages from old manuscripts, slipping verses of the Psalms into the hems of their robes, carrying the word of God close to their hearts. And as the soldiers feasted in the halls, the nuns knelt in shadows, praying not for salvation but for remembrance. The youngest among them, Sister Maria, barely 17, asked Helena why God had forsaken them. Helena placed a trembling hand upon her cheek and said, "Child, faith is not lost when God is silent. It is lost when we stop listening." Outside, the wind howled across the hills, carrying the scent of smoke and iron, the scent of empire. The moon hung low, pale and distant, as if unwilling to watch what mankind had done to holiness. And beneath that cold light, the nuns of St. Catherine held their ground, their prayers rising like smoke, thin but unbroken. Before we continue into the darker hours of their fate, if you wish to uncover more hidden histories like these, subscribe to the channel and like the video, because stories like this deserve to live on, not in silence, but in remembrance. The conquest of Constantinople had changed everything, and the ripples of empire spread far beyond its walls, reaching even the smallest monasteries hidden among the hills. What began as victory soon became occupation, and what was called peace felt like a long shadow cast over the faithful. The nuns of St. Catherine were allowed to live, but they were no longer free, their every movement watched, their every word weighed by those who feared what faith could inspire. They were made to pay a tax for their existence, a price for their prayers, as if salvation itself required tribute to the Sultan. Some soldiers grew restless, mocking the sisters' vows, circling them like wolves around a flame. The convent that had once been a sanctuary became a cage of stone, the air thick with incense and fear. Helena continued to write, her pages hidden beneath the floorboards, chronicling each passing day like a confession no one would ever hear. She wrote of faith tested not by fire, but by humiliation, of devotion surviving where hope could not. She wrote that they prayed not for rescue, but for strength to endure, for grace to outlive cruelty. At night, the sisters gathered around her, their faces pale in candlelight, listening as she read the Psalms in a trembling voice. Outside, the empire celebrated its victories, but inside those walls, victory meant survival. Maria, the youngest, fell ill from hunger, her body frail, but her eyes still burning with belief. Helena cared for her, breaking her own bread to feed her, whispering prayers between her breaths. One evening, soldiers found them praying and mocked their devotion, laughing as they kicked over the candles and ground the crucifix into the dirt. Maria looked at Helena and whispered, "They can take the light, but they cannot touch the flame." That night she died with a faint smile, her hands clasped in prayer, and the sisters buried her in the courtyard beneath the olive tree. Helena marked the spot with a single stone and carved upon it the words, "Still faithful." As the years passed, the monastery decayed, yet the spirit within it refused to die. The sisters grew old, their backs bent but their resolve unbroken, carrying the secret of their endurance like a sacred relic. Helena wrote her final words on the last scrap of parchment she had, sealing it beneath the chapel ruins. To the ones who find this, she wrote, "Remember that faith does not live in buildings or crowns. It lives in the quiet hearts that refuse to surrender." When she died, the remaining sisters buried her beside Maria, their tears mingling with the dust. After that, the convent fell silent again, its walls swallowed by ivy, its name lost to time. Travellers spoke of strange sounds echoing through the ruins at night, the faint sound of bells, the murmur of prayer beneath the wind. Centuries later, when explorers uncovered the site, they found fragments of manuscripts, burned yet legible, the ink of Helena's words still etched into the parchment like scars. They found the stone marked, "Still Faithful," and beneath it a wooden cross untouched by decay. No empire lasts forever, and even the Ottomans, who once seemed eternal, met their twilight. But faith, quiet, humble, defiant faith, survived them all. It survived in whispers, in hidden altars, in the unyielding strength of women who refused to be erased. Their suffering was greater than history dared to tell, their courage deeper than legend could capture. And though the empire built mosques, palaces, and cities of gold, it could never bury the prayers that rose from the ashes of St. Catherine. Because faith, once tested in fire, becomes indestructible. And as the world forgets, their story remains, written not in ink or stone, but in the silence that follows every act of cruelty. If this story moved you, if you believe the voices of these forgotten women deserve to be heard again, subscribe to the channel and like the video, because remembering them keeps their light alive, even in the darkest corners of history.